Hello, this is Todd Luck, and imagine you're in an experimental vehicle that can burrow into the Earth. And so you're just going to take it for a little test drive through the Earth's crust, and then you'll come back out again. What could possibly go wrong? Well, of course, everything. The acceleration gets stuck, the brakes don't work, and you will not survive. There's not even going to be anything of you left to find. You're going to end up in the molten core of the planet. But don't worry, my friends, that's actually a misconception. The Earth is actually not filled with magma. Oh no, as we're about to find out, it's actually a hollow sphere filled with dinosaurs and cave women. This is a review of At the Earth's Core, a hardcover graphic novel produced by Dark Horse in 2015. This hardcover is a comic adaptation of the novel of the same name by Edgar Rice Burroughs, who created Tarzan and John Carter of Mars, and he wrote a lot of other novels. And At the Earth's Core was the beginning of a series of novels set in Pellucidar, which is the world inside of the Earth. And while John Carter and Tarzan were his most popular creations, Pellucidar probably comes in third. It has the most novels other than Tarzan and John Carter. It is so popular, this is not the first comic adaptation of it that I've reviewed. Dark Horse, a couple years after this hardcover, would reprint the DC Comics adaptation of the novel. DC adapted it in the 1970s, and it has artwork that looks like this. I did like this adaptation. You can check out my review for more details, but it has about 70 pages or so to adapt the novel, and then there's also a chapter where they tried to start adapting the second novel, but then got canceled and had to basically wrap everything up in that one chapter. This has somewhere around 100 pages to adapt the novel, so it gets to be a little bit more thorough. So when you open it up, you see a nice map of Pellucidar, and the pages are glossy and thick, and it feels like a very premium format. The cover is by the interior artist Jamie Chase, and I think it's a cool idea. And so it basically summarizes what Pellucidar is like, right? We have a dinosaur chasing a woman. In this case, is an intelligent dinosaur called a Mahar, which is the ruling race of Pellucidar, and they rule over the humans. In this case, we've got Diane the Beautiful, one of our main characters, and in the background, we can see how the horizon slopes upward in Pellucidar because you're inside of a hollow sphere. All right, so let's go ahead and address the mammoth in the room, the art. So the art style is obviously very simplified and stylized. And there are going to be some people who like that or love it, right? And then there are going to be people on the opposite spectrum who are like, oh, I would never buy a comic that looks like that. And that's fine too, right? There's another adaptation of At the Earth's Core that you can get in comic book form, so you're good. I'm kind of in between, right? It's not my preferred art style, but I think at times it's good and it gets the job done. My personal preference is to have a more realistic style of artwork that shows the details in the backgrounds and the creatures of the fantastic world that it's building. I think the storytelling is solid, and I think there are times when there's just a really good use of shadows that create a great atmosphere and look really nice. And there are scenes where it looks quite nice. I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, to me at least, on the artwork, but I'm really here more for the story. And so our writer is Bobby Nash, and he stays very close to the novel, and again is allowed to be a little bit more thorough with it because he has a little bit more space than DC had back in the 70s. And so At the Earth's Core stars David Enos, our hero, and the inventor Abner Perry, and they get in an experimental vehicle that burrows into the Earth. And like I said, things go wrong and they end up burrowing into the Earth's core. Much to their surprise, they find a prehistoric world that lines the Earth's core, and humans in this world are kept as slaves. Pellucidar is ruled by a cruel race of intelligent dinosaurs known as the Mahars, and of course David is going to escape captivity and he will lead the humans against their dinosaur captors. It's been over 100 years since the original novel, and a story like this has been told thousands of times since then, but it's always good to go back to one of the originals to see how it could be done right. Like any adaptation, there is artistic license taken, and you can see that right on the cover as Diane the Beautiful is wearing a bikini. So this is super common. Everyone does this. Everyone actually just sticks Burroughs' women from other worlds into bikinis. It's just a thing. In the actual novel, she's described as wearing a one-piece outfit, similar to what you would expect a primitive culture to wear. So the Mahars are actually death, and in the novels, they can only communicate mentally with each other. And so they have Sagoths, who are kind of their enforcers and their slave drivers. They're these guerrilla men who do their bidding, and they communicate with them by a form of sign language. And so in the adaptations, everyone I've ever seen does this, including this one. They give the Mahars the ability to telepathically communicate with at least the Sagoths, in this case also the humans. That's fine. Everyone does this. No one wants to deal with dinosaur sign language in a visual medium. There are some instances of some unique artistic license I haven't seen in other adaptations. So for instance, the Sagoths, who are gorilla men, are shown as being giant gorillas here. Another one is the Temple of the Mahars, which is described as being a domed temple with openings in the top for the Mahars and an entrance at the bottom for the humans. In this adaptation, those entrances are shown, but they have a completely different take on what the temple looks like. Interestingly enough, it has a very similar take to the scene inside of the temple, the famous scene where the Mahars devour their human victims. In the novel, they hypnotize the humans and then basically take them apart piece by piece, like they're mutilating them. And because they're hypnotized, the humans don't even react to it. It's very scary, very horrific. In the DC Comics adaptation, they basically just had all of that happen underwater and just show the blood. Here, it's a very similar thing, except we do actually see a body part in a Mahar's mouth. So I guess it's a little bit more scary, but it's still, I think, one of those things where either they just didn't want to spend the time on it, or they just felt like the original version in the novel was maybe a little too intense to show in the comic. One very cool scene we do get in here, we did not get in the adaptation in the 70s, was the scene with the Mahar scientists dissecting the humans as part of experiments. This is a very important part of the novel if you're going to read the Pellucidar novels that are being put out now. Everything after Burroughs kind of evolves around this scene of the Mahars as this highly intelligent scientific race that doesn't understand humans. And so it was kind of cool to see that in this comic adaptation. And if you're not familiar with the ending of At the Earth's Core, I'm not going to spoil it for you here. Let's just say there's a twist that sets up a sequel. And I will say that here, I think they simplified it a little bit too much. It was always kind of stretching believability in the novel. Here, I think it seems even less plausible the way that they kind of simplified it, but it's still good stuff, and it is a heck of a cliffhanger. And I think it's interesting they kept the cliffhanger from the novel. I do wonder if they plan to do more, right? If they plan to adapt the other novels. Of course, that never happened. And unfortunately, there really isn't a comic adaptation of that second novel or the other novels in that series other than Tarzan at the Earth's Core, which was adapted in several issues of the Gold Key Tarzan series. However, if you're looking for new adventures at the Earth's Core, there is an excellent comic strip on EdgarRiceBurroughs.com that will fill that void in your life. It is part of their online comic strip subscription, which includes Tarzan and John Carter and all kinds of other strips, and it is amazing for only $22 a year. And a few years ago, American Mythology also put out a series of excellent Pellucidar comics that are absolutely worth hunting down and picking up. And so I do recommend picking up actually both of these. I think they're both good adaptations. They both bring something a little bit different to the table, and I don't think you can have too many comics based on a really good story. And this was not the only original graphic novel they put out of a non-Tarzan Burroughs character. They did The Outlaw Prince, which was the first part of an adaptation of The Outlaw of Torn by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And at some point, I'll be taking a look at this as well. And by the way, if you're interested in a movie adaptation of the novel, it does exist. It's pretty darn good, and I will be reviewing it at some point. All right, that's it. Like and subscribe for more videos. And until next time, see ya.